Well, Michael Karanicolas is the Executive Director of the UCLA Institute for Technology, Law and Policy, and he joins us from Los Angeles in California. Thanks for coming on TRT. I guess, first of all, what did you make of this letter written by Zuckerberg, and why do you think he wrote it?
Well, I mean, just to clarify first, this is not a dynamic that is unique to Facebook, to Meta, and it's also not a dynamic that's unique to the United States. Every platform for decades now has faced significant pressure from governments around the world in order to moderate content in particular directions. I think that there has been a significant amount of focus on content moderation related to COVID-19 because there was genuinely a significant crackdown on certain kinds of speech as a result of the pandemic, which you could argue is justified as a result of the public health situation. But it's worth noting that this is, while there's a lot of political attention being paid to this at the first place, it's a longer term dynamic and a longer term challenge, which relates to the dynamic between governments and online platforms in policing speech.
And just really specifically and briefly, if you would, what exactly is this type of content that Zuckerberg says he eventually censored? And do you think these allegations are damaging to the Biden administration and to the US government more broadly?
Well, a lot of the controversy is related to differing approaches to misinformation, which for a long time has been the third rail around content moderation, because it's the area where most online platforms, including Facebook, have been most reticent to take a strong position because it's very challenging to define, right? It's comparatively easy for a platform to say, we are going to reject content that comes from particular U.S. designated terrorist groups, for them to say we're going to reject nudity or child sexual abuse material. But misinformation is something that belies a clear definition. And enforcement of that scaled up significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's, I think, why there's been significant controversy, is because the enforcement of those rules has cut into ongoing political debates within the U.S. and increased pressure around what's always been an extremely controversial topic.
It does sort of seem like we're at quite a critical moment when it comes to free speech and social media platforms. Twitter, Meta, now Signal, all embroiled in kind of distinct but related challenges. Platforms have often been left largely to their own devices, as you say, to kind of decide exactly what needs enforcing and what doesn't. Do you think they need more or better regulation and more and better enforcement from governments around the world?
I mean, the quick answer to this, and the reason why it's such a challenging question to address, is it sort of depends on which government. There are governments that have extremely authoritarian attitudes towards online speech, and when they are pushing platforms in particular directions, either to crack down on political opposition, to crack down on journalism, to crack down on anti-corruption reporting, most people welcome the platform's ability to push back on that. And users in a lot of these platforms, in a lot of these countries, civil society, will welcome a strong role of the online platforms because it's the only way that they can get their message out. On the other hand, you know, when you see more complicated political dimensions that are taking place with regard to governments that are pushing democratic governments, you know, pushing platforms in order to take down things like hate speech, it becomes much more complicated. These are incredibly difficult questions to handle. The contours of the acceptable, what it should or should not be acceptable to say, is an incredibly difficult question to answer, even in dealing with individual pieces of content. And content moderation at scale is incredibly difficult. So it's a very fraught dynamic between governments and platforms. I think pretty much everybody who thoughtfully looks at this agrees that more transparency is needed, and it's incredibly problematic for this stuff to be happening behind the scenes. But there's a lot of contentious debate about what the specific dynamic should be between platforms and governments, and what methods of coercion or pressure are legitimate and what are not in order to push platforms in particular directions.
All right, complicated stuff. Michael Karanicolas from Los